We look at it from a couple different perspectives. One is really about incremental and sustaining innovation, and one is disruptive innovation. And I think a lot of the companies that we discussed over this weekend are really, they do the innovation well on the incremental and sustaining side. That's the disruptive side that's really the killer, right? And that's because they don't identify the trends, they don't understand the services and solutions that can be built on those trends, and then of course we have the whole crisis of prioritization that I talked about. It usually starts from the top. Emmett had a little bit of a conversation around that from the beginning, and I discussed that in my talk as well about having a coalition of the willing, having a strong CEO, making sure that you had support from your shareholders, the board of directors, and potentially even the rest of the folks who are on your C team and manage the lines of business, right? So that's the first place that you got to start. You got to have a lot of the people who are really making decisions of the company on board with this decisions, because even if a couple of them aren't on board, it's not going to work, right? So that's the first thing. You have to have the organizational structure second, right? So it's the people first and then the organizational structure second. And that's really around the 4 zones as well. And so for us to talk about the 4 zones, I'm not sure we have enough time, but that's really around having an incubation zone that's isolated from the rest of the organization, who are free to create, who are free to run their businesses, who have a separate GM, who have their own budget that's outboard of the annual operating plan, and they're really free to go create the next big thing for the corporation. And that's really another part of the equation that folks just don't get. We would probably look at it from 3 perspectives, right? And the first one is, do you have the right people? Do you have a coalition of the willing? Do you have a very strong CEO who's got great relationships with the board and the rest of the executives, right? That's the first thing. The second thing is you really have to have a really good, well, it's the title of the book, right? You really have to have the organizational structure in place, right? And that's making sure that the incubation zone has its own set of culture, its own success metrics, and really the creativity to go build new businesses, and that's outboard of the annual operating plan. That's one of the things that we see as well that's a huge inhibitor to actually building and responding to these disruptive innovations. And then probably the third thing is making sure that you understand that these technology waves are increasing in amplitude, and that means that the repercussions for not catching one of these waves is even more significant. And then there's the number of waves that are happening within a shorter time period. So it's a double whammy for those companies that don't actually catch these waves. So identifying them, building solutions on top of them, and getting the timing right is probably the third thing. And there's a couple really good examples, right? We saw some of them today, and we even had a gentleman from a company, Microsoft, that has done it pretty well after they got new leadership in, who was really committed to this idea of taking the company forward on these new waves. And Satya talks about being a cloud company first, a mobile company first. So again, you see that it starts at the top, right? And then of course with Sundar Pichai over at Google, they are a cloud company. They've got Google GCP, right? And then you've also got really their whole Android initiative, which is their whole mobile enterprise. And then they're really concentrating on being an AI-driven company. And so you can see that they've identified the waves, and now they're actually building solutions on top of those waves that will advantage them over their competitors within those categories in which they compete. And so for us, again, it's really one of those things where it starts at the top, and then it's identifying and then building those solutions and getting the timing right again.